Who is the real Jane Marple? Beneath the quiet spinster of St. Mary Mead lies a past pulsing with secrets. Did she outwit thieves in glittering Edwardian ballrooms, unravel wartime conspiracies, or chase lost love through Paris's shadowy streets? What mysteries did she bury, and who's hunting her now? Uncover the truth in Miss Marple's hidden past, where every clue unveils a life you never knew.
Chapter 1. The Whispered Letter. In the sleepy hollow of St. Mary Mead, where the hedgerows whispered secrets to the wind and the church bells tolled with the lazy precision of an old grandfather clock, Jane Marple sat in her sun-dappled drawing-room. The year was one of those timeless summers where the air hung heavy with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass. At 70-something, though she never divulged the exact figure, Miss Marple had cultivated an air of unassuming gentility, her sharp blue eyes hidden behind spectacles that perched on the tip of her nose like a bird ready to take flight. Her hands, veined like the delicate tracery of autumn leaves, busied themselves with a half-finished knitting project, a woolen scarf and soft lavender that promised warmth against the encroaching chill of evening. The postman's bicycle crunched against the gravel path outside her cottage, a sound as familiar as the coo of doves in the eaves. She set aside her needles, rising with the graceful economy of someone who had long ago learned to conserve energy for the pursuits that truly mattered. The envelope that arrived that morning was unlike the usual bills or invitations to village fêtes. It was thick, cream-colored parchment sealed with a blob of crimson wax imprinted with an unfamiliar crest, a stylized fox entwined with thorns. No return address, only her name scrawled in elegant looping script, Miss Jane Marple, Primrose Cottage, St. Mary Mead. Curiosity, that eternal spark in her soul, flickered to life. She sliced open the seal with a silver letter opener, its handle carved in the shape of a blooming lily, a relic from her aunt's estate. Inside lay a single sheet, folded thrice, the paper yellowed at the edges as if it had slumbered in a forgotten drawer for decades. The words danced across the page in faded ink. Dearest Jane, the shadows of our youth stretch long, do they not? Remember the garden where roses bled their petals underfoot and a thief's hand claimed what was not his? The heirloom whispers still, buried in echoes of laughter and betrayal. Decode the veil, and perhaps the past will release its grip. But beware, the fox hunts in silence. Yours in veiled reminiscence, a ghost from the thorned path. Miss Marple's breath caught, a rare lapse in her composure. The garden, it evoked a flood of memories from her early 20s, back in 1908, when Edwardian England shimmered with the promise of endless afternoons and starched collars. She had been no more than a wide-eyed companion to her cousin, Lady Evelyn Hargrove, invited to the opulent estate of Lord and Lady Beaumont in the rolling hills of Kent. The Beaumont garden party was legendary, a swirl of silk gowns, parasols twirling like colorful tops, and the tinkling of crystal glasses filled with chilled lemonade spiked with sherry. Jane had smiled demurely, her own attire a modest muslin dress in pale ivory, adorned only with a simple brooch of seed pearls. She preferred observation to participation, finding more thrill in the subtle interplay of glances and whispers than in the whirl of the waltz. The party unfolded in the vast gardens, terraced lawns descending to a shimmering lake where swans glided like ghosts. Tables groaned on platters of cucumber sandwiches, strawberry tarts glistening with sugar, and towering cakes iced in intricate patterns. A string quartet played lilting melodies from a gazebo draped in wisteria, the purple blooms cascading like frozen waterfalls. Amid the gaiety, Jane noticed the Beaumont heirloom first, a magnificent sapphire necklace known as the Star of Azure, passed down through generations. Lady Beaumont wore it proudly, the gem catching the sunlight like a captive star. It's said to bring fortune to the pure of heart, she boasted to a cluster of admirers, her voice carrying over the hum of conversation. Jane, sipping her tea from a delicate china cup, urged Holt. Jane stepped forward, her voice steady as steel. "That won't be necessary, Sir Reginald. The game is up." He whirled, his face contorting in surprise. "You, the little mouse of a companion?" "Little mice see much in the corners," Jane replied calmly. "Your crest gave you away, the fox in thorns. And the soil on Eliza's apron matched the rose-bed where Lady Beaumont rested earlier. You slipped the necklace off while distracting her with flattery, then passed it to Eliza to hide." Eliza burst into tears. "He forced me, miss, said he'd tell everyone about my brother's troubles." Sir Reginald snarled, lunging for the pouch, but Jane was quicker, snatching it from Eliza's grasp. "The authorities will hear the truth. Debts are no excuse for theft." A scuffle ensued, Sir Reginald's hand grazing Jane's arm, but shouts from the manor halted him. Lord Beaumont and guests, alerted by a servant's tip, rushed out with lanterns blazing. Sir Reginald fled into the night, but not before Jane secured the necklace, its sapphire cool against her palm. The next morning, under the clear blue sky, the Beaumonts expressed profuse gratitude. Lady Beaumont clasped the heirloom back around her neck. "Miss Marple, you've saved our family's honor. How can we repay you?" Jane smiled faintly. "A quiet life is reward enough, but perhaps keep an eye on those you trust." As she departed with Lady Evelyn, the carriage wheels turning on the gravel, Jane tucked away a small note from Eliza, a thank you scribbled in hasty script. The incident faded into village lore, but for Jane it marked the awakening of her innate gift, the art of unraveling human knots. Back in her drawing room in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple opened her eyes, the letter still in hand. The cryptic message wasn't just a reminder, it held a code. She examined the paper closely, holding it to the light. Faint watermarks emerged, dots and dashes, Morse code woven into the fibers. Her fingers traced them. "The fox returns. Seek the thorned rose in your attic." Her attic? She rose, ascending the creaky stairs to the dusty upper realm where trunks slumbered like forgotten sentinels. Among them, one bore a label in her youthful handwriting, "Kent Memories." Inside, amid pressed flowers and faded invitations, lay a dried rose, thorns intact, petals brittle. Pinned to it was a yellowed card, "From the Beaumont Garden, with eternal thanks." But beneath the rose, something glinted, a tiny locket engraved with the fox crest. She pried it open, revealing a miniature portrait of Sir Reginald, his eyes mocking. On the reverse, etched words, "The debt unpaid. One day the hunt resumes." Miss Marple's lips curved in a wry smile. The heirloom's resolution had restored the Beaumonts' honor, but Sir Reginald had escaped justice, vanishing into obscurity. Was the letter from him, or an heir seeking vengeance? The mystery lingered, a thread pulling at her curiosity. She descended, sealing the locket away. For now, the past rested, its whispers silenced. Yet in the quiet of St. Mary Mead, she knew shadows never truly faded. They merely waited for the right light to reveal them. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting golden pools on the floor. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the needles clicking like a metronome. Life in the village continued its gentle rhythm. Mrs. Price chattering over the fence about the vicar's sermon, children laughing in the lane. But within her, a spark reignited, the thrill of the unsolved. That evening, as twilight draped the garden in violet hues, she penned a note to an old contact at Scotland Yard, inquiring discreetly about the Thorne family. Satisfaction came not in closure, but in the pursuit. The heirloom's fate was sealed, honor restored, yet the sender's veil remained. And so, Miss Marple sipped her chamomile tea, content in the knowledge that some secrets bloomed best in patience. Chapter 1. The Whispered Letter, Continued Expansion. In the sleepy hollow of St. Mary Mead, where the hedgerows whispered secrets to the wind, and the church bells tolled with the lazy precision of an old grandfather clock, Jane Marple sat in her sun-dappled drawing-room. The year was one of those timeless summers where the air hung heavy with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass. At 70-something, though she never divulged the exact figure, Miss Marple had cultivated an air of unassuming gentility, her sharp blue eyes hidden behind spectacles that perched on the tip of her nose like a bird ready to take flight. Her hands, veined like the delicate tracery of autumn leaves, busied themselves with a half-finished knitting project, a woolen scarf in soft lavender that promised warmth against the encroaching chill of evening. The postman's bicycle crunched against the gravel path outside her cottage, a sound as familiar as the coo of doves in the eaves. She set aside her needles, rising with the graceful economy of someone who had long ago learned to conserve energy for the pursuits that truly mattered. The envelope that arrived that morning was unlike the usual bills or invitations to village fêtes. It was thick, cream-colored parchment, sealed with a blob of crimson wax, imprinted with an unfamiliar crest, a stylized fox entwined with thorns. No return address, only her name scrawled in elegant, looping script. Miss Jane Marple, Primrose Cottage, St. Mary Mead. Curiosity, that eternal spark in her soul, flickered to life. She sliced open the seal with a silver letter opener, its handle carved in the shape of a blooming lily, a relic from her aunt's estate. Inside lay a single sheet, folded thrice, the paper yellowed at the edges as if it had slumbered in a forgotten drawer for decades. The words danced across the page in faded ink. Dearest Jane, the shadows of our youth stretch long, do they not? Remember the garden where roses bled their petals underfoot, and a thief's hand claimed what was not his? The heirloom whispers still, buried in echoes of laughter and betrayal. Decode the veil, and perhaps the past will release its grip. But beware, the fox hunts in silence. Yours in veiled reminiscence, a ghost from the thorned path. Miss Marple's breath caught, a rare lapse in her composure. The garden, it evoked a flood of memories from her early 20s, back in 1908, when Edwardian England shimmered with the promise of endless afternoons and starched colors. She had been no more than a wide-eyed companion to her cousin, Lady Evelyn Hargrove, invited to the opulent estate of Lord and Lady Beaumont in the rolling hills of Kent. The Beaumont garden party was legendary, a swirl of silk gowns, parasols twirling like colorful tops, and the tinkling of crystal glasses filled with chilled lemonade spiked with sherry. She leaned back in her armchair, the letter trembling slightly in her grasp. Closing her eyes, she let the past wash over her like a gentle tide. It had begun innocently enough with her arrival at Beaumont Manor. The driveway, lined with ancient oaks, seemed to bow in welcome as the carriage rattled up to the grand portico. Lady Evelyn, resplendent in a gown of seafoam green, chattered excitedly about the eligible bachelors attending. "Jane, darling, you mustn't hide behind your sketches this time. Promise me you'll dance at least once." Jane had smiled demurely, her own attire a modest muslin dress in pale ivy, adorned only with a simple brooch of seed pearls. She preferred observation to participation, finding more thrill in the subtle interplay of glances and whispers than in the whirl of the waltz. Upon entering the manor, they were greeted by the butler, Mr. Hargreaves, a tall man with a voice like polished mahogany. "Welcome, ladies. The festivities await in the gardens."
The gardens were a paradise of design, with manicured parterres bordered by boxwood hedges, fountains splashing merrily, and arbors heavy with climbing clematis in shades of pink and white. Guests milled about, ladies fanning themselves against the warmth, gentlemen in tailcoats discussing politics or the latest horse races. Jane spotted a group of young women giggling over a game of lawn tennis, their rackets swishing through the air with spirited energy. As she strolled with Lady Evelyn, they encountered Viscount Harold, the host's son, a handsome youth with curly hair and a mischievous grin. "Lady Evelyn, Miss Marple, join us for archery. The targets are set by the orchard." Lady Evelyn accepted eagerly, but Jane declined, opting to wander alone. She found a quiet spot near a bed of hybrid tea roses, their blooms in vibrant reds and yellows, exhaling a perfume that mingled with the distant scent of pipe tobacco from a nearby smoker. Here she pulled out her sketchbook, her pencil capturing the elegant arch of a lady's parasol or the curve of a gentleman's hat. It was then she first noticed the star of azure. Lady Beaumont, a stately woman with silver-streaked hair piled high, paraded it during a promenade. The necklace's central sapphire was the size of a robin's egg, surrounded by diamonds that sparkled like dew on spider webs. "It is a family treasure from the time of Queen Anne," she explained to an admiring circle, including Sir Reginald Thorne. Sir Reginald, with his exotic tales, leaned in close. "Indeed, my lady, I've seen its equal in the Sultan's palace in Istanbul. Does it have a curse, as some jewels do?" Lady Beaumont laughed, a trill like bird song. "Only the curse of envy, sir." Jane observed how Sir Reginald's fingers twitched, as if itching to touch it. Later, during a picnic spread on blankets under the shade of a massive cedar tree, sandwiches of smoked salmon and cream cheese were passed around, accompanied by flutes of champagne bubbling like laughter. Jane sat with Mr. Elias Greenwood, the botanist, who pointed out the rare Lilium regale lilies imported from China. "Their trumpet shape is nature's own fanfare," he enthused, his eyes lighting up behind his glasses.
Chapter 2. Shadows of the Grand Tour. In the hushed sanctuary of Primrose Cottage, Miss Marple folded the cryptic letter from Chapter 1, its Morse code still echoing in her mind like a distant telegraph. The locket with Sir Reginald's portrait lay on her side table, a silent sentinel from the Beaumont affair. But as she sipped her afternoon tea, Earl Grey with a hint of bergamot, the clues tugged her deeper into memory's labyrinth. The thorned rose had pricked a forgotten vein, leading to her grand tour of 1910, a whirlwind of continental splendor that masked darker undercurrents. At 24, she had embarked as companion to Miss Arabella Worthington, a spirited heiress whose fortune drew suitors like moths to a flame. Their itinerary promised culture and refinement, but in Venice, the city of canals, illusion met reality in a tangle of forgeries and deceit. Miss Marple set down her cup, her eyes drifting to the window, where rain pattered against the panes like impatient fingers. Closing them, she surrendered to the recollection, the scent of Venetian salt water replacing the floral aroma of her garden. It began in London, at Victoria Station, amid the clamor of porters shouting and steam hissing from locomotives. Arabella, clad in a traveling suit of emerald velvet with a feathered hat, bubbled with excitement. "Jane, imagine! Paris, Rome, and Venice, the cradle of romance! Father insists I broaden my horizons before settling down." Jane, in a practical woolen skirt and blouse, nodded with a smile. "Horizons indeed, Miss Arabella, but remember, not all that glitters in foreign lands is gold." Her role was chaperone and confidant, a position secured through family connections, allowing her to escape the predictability of English village life. The journey unfolded like a lavish tapestry, Paris with its Eiffel Tower piercing the sky, cafes alive with artists debating over absinthe, and the Louvre's halls echoing with footsteps. But Venice captivated them most, arriving by train to the Santa Lucia station, where gondolas bobbed like black swans on the Grand Canal. The air hummed with the cries of vendors hawking lace and glass trinkets, mingled with the salty tang of the lagoon.
They checked into the Palazzo Vendramin, a Baroque hotel overlooking the water, its frescoed ceilings depicting mythical lovers in eternal embrace. Arabella's eyes sparkled as they settled in. "Jane, we must explore every inch. I've heard of masked balls and secret galleries." Jane, unpacking her modest valise, felt a thrill tempered with caution. Whispers of art frauds had reached even her quiet circles, masterpieces vanishing, replaced by cunning replicas. Their first outing was a gondola ride at dusk, the boatmen poling through narrow Rio channels where laundry fluttered like flags from balconies. Lanterns flickered on bridges, casting golden ripples. Arabella leaned over the side, trailing her fingers in the water. "It's magical, isn't it? Like stepping into a painting." Jane agreed, but her gaze caught a shadowy figure on a nearby bridge, a man in a tailored coat watching them intently. His features were chiseled, with dark hair slicked back and a smile that promised adventure. Later at dinner in the hotel's opulent dining room, adorned with Murano chandeliers twinkling like stars, he introduced himself. "Signor Lorenzo Valtieri at your service," he said, bowing with theatrical flair. His voice was smooth as aged wine, accented with Italian warmth. "I couldn't help noticing two such enchanting visitors. May I join you for aperitivo?" Arabella flushed with delight. "Of course. Tell us about Venice's hidden gems, Signor Valtieri." Over Prosecco and Sacchetti, tiny bites of polenta topped with gorgonzola, Lorenzo regaled them with tales of the Doge's palace intrigues and lost treasures in the Basilica di San Marco. "But the true art lies off the beaten path," he confided, his eyes locking on Arabella's necklace, a family heirloom of emeralds. "I know a private gallery in Dorsoduro, housing Renaissance masterpieces unseen by tourists." Jane observed silently, noting how his fingers drummed a subtle rhythm on the tablecloth, as if signaling to an unseen accomplice. The next day he escorted them to the gallery, a dimly lit atelier tucked in a labyrinthine alley. Canvases lined the walls, alleged Titians with voluptuous nudes, Bellinis depicting serene Madonnas. The owner, a portly man named Signore Bianchi, beamed. "Exquisite, no. This one, a lost Caravaggio, could be yours for a modest sum." Arabella gasped at a portrait of a veiled woman, her eyes hauntingly alive. "It's breathtaking. Father would adore it for the manner." Jane peered closer, her knitting needles clicking idly in her lap, a habit she carried everywhere, disguising her scrutiny. The paint seemed too fresh, the craquelure uneven, lacking the authentic web of age. "Intriguing," she murmured. "But does it not remind you of the forgery scandal in Florence last year?" Lorenzo laughed lightly. "Ah, Miss Marple, you have a skeptic's eye. Rest assured Bianchi's provenance is impeccable." Yet his glance at Bianchi held a flicker of warning. As days blurred into a montage of adventures, visiting the Rialto market, where fishmongers bellowed prices amid piles of wriggling eels and vibrant radicchio, attending an opera at La Fenice, where arias soared like birds in flight, Lorenzo's courtship intensified. He gifted Arabella a silk scarf patterned with gondolas, whispering, "It matches the mystery in your eyes." Evening strolls along the Zitera promenade, with the Giudecca Canal reflecting the sunset in fiery oranges, became ritual. Arabella confided in Jane one night, as they prepared for bed in their suite overlooking the water. "He's so worldly, Jane. Do you think he could be the one?" Jane adjusted her nightcap, choosing words carefully. "Worldly men often hide depths. Watch his reflections in the canals. They reveal more than words." Suspicion gnawed at Jane. She noticed Lorenzo's absences coinciding with reports of minor thefts, a tourist's wallet gone, a merchant's ledger tampered. One afternoon, while Arabella napped, Jane ventured alone to the Accademia gallery, comparing authentic works to Bianchi's offerings. The brushstrokes differed subtly. Bianchi's lacked the master's fluidity. Returning, she overheard Lorenzo in a cafe, speaking in hushed tones to a cloaked figure. "The heiress bites. The forgery will seal the deal. 10,000 lire." Her heart quickened. That evening, at a masked ball in a decaying palazzo, chandeliers dripped wax like tears, and guests swirled in costumes of harlequins and queens. Arabella, as a Venetian courtesan in crimson satin, danced with Lorenzo. His domino mask concealed all but his predatory smile. Jane, as a simple nun, with a veil shading her face, circulated unobtrusively. She slipped into the palazzo's library, where dusty tomes on art history lined shelves. Flipping through one, she found notations on forgery techniques, aged canvases baked in ovens, pigments mixed with modern chemicals. A noise startled her. Footsteps. Hiding behind a curtain, she watched Bianchi enter with a satchel, extracting a rolled canvas. The Titian is ready. Valtieri will close the sale tonight. Her mind raced. She needed proof. As the ball crescendoed with fireworks bursting over the lagoon, coloring the sky in bursts of emerald and gold, she trailed Lorenzo and Arabella to a private gondola. They glided to Bianchi's gallery under cover of night, the water lapping like conspiratorial whispers. Inside, the masterpiece awaited. A forged Venus, luminescent under candlelight. Arabella, entranced, agreed to purchase. "Wire the funds tomorrow," Lorenzo urged, with his hand on her arm. Jane, who had followed stealthily, emerged from the shadows. "Before you do, Miss Arabella, consider the light." She held a lantern high, revealing inconsistencies, a drip of wet paint, a signature smudged unnaturally. Lorenzo's face hardened. "What nonsense! This is authentic." "Not so," Jane countered. "The pigment, Prussian blue, wasn't available in Titian's era, and the canvas threads are machine-woven, a modern invention." Bianchi paled, fumbling for excuses. Arabella stepped back, horrified. "You deceived me?" Lorenzo lunged for a canvas, but Jane, with surprising agility, knocked over an easel, scattering tools. A hidden compartment spilled open, stamps, inks, half-finished fakes. "The web unravels," Jane said calmly. Chaos erupted. Lorenzo fled through a back door, leaping into a waiting boat. Bianchi was apprehended by summoned carabinieri, alerted by Jane's earlier anonymous napkin scrawled on a Cathay napkin. Arabella's fortune remained intact, the forgery exposed as a cheap imitation. In the aftermath, as dawn painted the canals in soft pastels, Arabella hugged Jane tearfully on the hotel balcony. "You saved me from ruin and heartbreak. How did you know?" "People like paintings reveal flaws under scrutiny. His charm was too polished, like varnish over cracks." They departed Venice soon after, the train chugging towards Rome's ancient ruins. Jane bid farewell to the fleeting romance of the city, her heart lighter yet wiser. But weeks later, back in England, a postcard arrived. Venetian stamp, no return address. The front depicted a shadowy canal, the back read, "The deceiver remembers. Vengeance flows like water." Signed with a sketch of a mask. Miss Marple opened her eyes in St. Mary Mead, the rain easing to a drizzle. The postcard's promise lingered, a bridge to further shadows. But for now, the Grand Tour's chapter closed with Arabella's gratitude echoing, a fortune safeguarded, illusions shattered, and Jane's quiet triumph in the art of discernment. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Grand Tour. Full expansion. In the hushed sanctuary of Primrose Cottage, Miss Marple folded the cryptic letter, its echoes fading like mist. The locket's threat stirred memories of her grand tour, an odyssey that began in the spring of 1910. At 24, she had accepted the role of companion to Miss Arabella Worthington, whose father's shipping empire funded their European escapade. Arabella, with her cascade of auburn curls and infectious laugh, sought culture, Jane, adventure veiled in propriety. Their departure from Victoria Station was a spectacle, trunks piled high, the air thick with coal smoke and farewells. "Jane, this is our great escape," Arabella exclaimed, waving a lace handkerchief as the train pulled away. Paris greeted them with boulevards lined in chestnut trees, the Seine glittering under bridges adorned with statues. They strolled the Champs-Élysées, sampling macarons in pastel hues, pistachio green, rose pink, from La Dure's elegant boxes. Evenings brought cabarets, where can-can dancers kicked high amid clouds of cigarette smoke. But Jane's eye caught pickpockets weaving through crowds, a prelude to greater deceptions. Crossing into Italy, the Alps loomed like silent guardians. Venice emerged as a dream afloat, their arrival coinciding with the Festa della Senza, boats parading in a riot of flags and music. The Palazzo Vendramin's suite boasted velvet drapes and views of San Giorgio Maggior's bell tower piercing the horizon. Explorations began with a Vaporito ride to Murano, where glassblowers twisted molten orbs into fantastical shapes, swans, vases blooming with color. Arabella purchased a chandelier pendant, its facets catching light like imprisoned rainbows. "For the drawing room back home," she said. That evening, in the hotel's salon, Signor Lorenzo Valtieri appeared. Tall, with olive skin and eyes like polished onyx, he approached with a bouquet of calla lilies. "For the most radiant arrivals in Venice," he purred. Arabella accepted, charmed. "You're too kind, signor. Join us for tea?" Over biscotti, dipped in vin santo, Lorenzo spun yarns of his noble lineage, claiming descent from a doge. "My family owns vineyards in Chianti, perhaps a tour some day." Jane sipped her tea, noting his gold signet ring engraved with a serpent, a symbol of cunning in heraldry books she'd read. The next morn he guided them to Piazza San Marco, pigeons fluttering like confetti. The basilica's mosaics gleamed gold, depicting biblical tales. "Touch the porphyry columns for luck," Lorenzo urged Arabella, his hand lingering on hers. Lunch at a trattoria, risotto nero, black with squid ink, paired with crisp Soave wine. Conversation flowed, Arabella sharing tales of English hunts, Lorenzo recounting gondola races. But intrigue brewed. At Bianchi's gallery, hidden behind a door marked with a discreet lion knocker, the air smelled of linseed oil and turpentine. Canvases whispered of genius, a purported Veronese feast scene, colors vivid as fresh fruit. "This Raphael Madonna, priceless," Bianchi boasted, his mustache twitching. Jane examined the frame's gilding, too uniform, lacking patina. "Curious," she said. "The halo's gold leaf seems contemporary." Lorenzo dismissed it with a wave. "Art evolves, Miss Marple." Days filled with novelty, a private concert in a canal-side palazzo, violins weeping Vivaldi, a visit to the Jewish ghetto, where synagogues hid behind plain facades, stories of resilience shared by a guide. Lorenzo's attentions peaked at a sunset cruise on the lagoon, islands like jewels in the water. "Arabella, you outshine the stars," he confessed, kneeling dramatically. She giggled. "You're incorrigible." Jane, from the stern, spotted a boat trailing them. Bianchi aboard, signaling with a lantern. That night, Arabella confided, "He's asked to court me formally. What do you think?" Probe his canvas. True colors emerge under pressure. Jane's investigation deepened. Posing as a tourist, she visited the Uffizi in Florence via day train, studying forgeries exhibits. Returning, she tailed Lorenzo to a warehouse in Cannaregio, where crates marked antiquities stacked high. Peering through a grimy window, she saw him and Bianchi doctoring a painting, adding cracks with a heated iron. Proof needed action. The masked ball provided cover. The palazzo's halls echoed with laughter, scents of perfume and roasting chestnuts. Jane, in her nun's habit, eavesdropped on whispers of the big sale. Following Lorenzo's lead, Arabella to the gallery. The midnight escapade, Jane sneaking in via service entrance, heart pounding as she hid in a wardrobe smelling of mothballs. The confrontation unfolded. Revelations, chase through alleys slick with puddles, Lorenzo's escape in a stolen gondola, waves splashing in pursuit. Carabinieri arrived, gallery sealed. Arabella safe, vowed caution. "Jane, you're my guardian angel." Return to England brought relief, but the postcard's arrival, masked threat, cast a long shadow. In St. Mary's Mead, Miss Marple sighed. The memory, a tapestry complete, with its threads tied with satisfaction, yet hinting at vengeance's tide.
Chapter 3. The Enigmatic Engagement. In the tranquil confines of Primrose Cottage, where the autumn leaves now drifted like forgotten confetti across the lawn, Miss Marple placed the Venetian postcard beside the locket from her earlier adventures. The veiled threat, "Vengeance flows like water," had not been idle words. Weeks after her return from the grand tour, whispers of scandal began to circulate in London's drawing rooms, tainting her name with insinuations of impropriety during her time abroad. At 25, Jane Marple found herself thrust back into England's rigid social whirl, where reputations were as fragile as porcelain teacups. The year was 1913, the air buzzing with the prelude to global unrest, though few yet sensed the storm brewing across the Channel. To shield herself from the gathering clouds of rumor, allegedly spread by a vengeful Lorenzo Valtieri, she accepted a strategic alliance, a brief engagement to Captain Desmond Hartley, a dashing officer in the King's Royal Rifle Corps, whose impeccable pedigree promised protection. Jane's re-entry into society commenced at a lavish soirée hosted by the Dowager Countess of Ashford at her Mayfair townhouse. The facade gleamed under gas lamps, carriages lining the street like obedient soldiers. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors, the air scented with hothouse orchids and the faint musk of cigars from the gentlemen's lounge. Jane, attired in a gown of midnight blue silk that whispered with each step, entered on her aunt's arm. "Chin up, dear," Aunt Lavinia murmured. "These vipers will slither away once they see you allied with Hartley." Captain Hartley awaited near the punch bowl, his uniform crisped with brass buttons and opulets, his mustache trimmed to military precision. Tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of stormy seas, he bowed deeply. "Miss Marple, you honor me with your presence. Shall we dance to dispel these absurd tales?" The orchestra struck up a Viennese waltz, couples swirling like leaves in a gale. As Hartley led her onto the floor, his hand firm on her waist, he leaned close. "I've heard the rumors, some Italian cad slandering your virtue. Marry me, even if in name only, and I'll silence them with my family's influence." Jane's steps were light, her mind sharper. "A kind offer, Captain, but alliances forged in haste often hide ulterior motives. What do you gain?" He chuckled, a low rumble, a clever wife, perhaps, and companionship in these uncertain times. The engagement was announced that night amid applause and champagne toasts. Whispers shifted from scandal to envy. Hartley snared the enigmatic Miss Marple. Yet Jane sensed undercurrents. Hartley's frequent absences for regimental duties coincided with hushed meetings in the townhouse's library, where maps of Europe lay unfurled, and telegrams arrived at odd hours. One crisp morning, as fog cloaked the Thames like a shroud, Jane accompanied Hartley to a regimental review in Hyde Park. Soldiers marched in formation, boots thudding in unison, bayonets glinting under a watery sun. Hartley introduced her to his comrades, Major Elias Blackwood, a stern man with a scar bisecting his brow, and Lieutenant Victor Klein, whose German accent hinted at dual heritage. "Fräulein Marple, you bring grace to our ranks," Klein jested, kissing her hand. Over luncheon at a nearby tea-room, scones slathered in clotted cream, Darjeeling steaming in Wedgwood cups, conversation turned to politics. "The Kaiser saber-rattling," Blackwood grumbled. "We must prepare." Hartley nodded. "Intelligence is key. Miss Marple, your keen eye might spot what we miss." Jane smiled demurely, but noted Klein's furtive glance toward a newspaper headline, "Balkan Tensions Escalate." That evening, at a diplomatic reception in Kensington Palace Gardens, amid fountains tinkling like distant bells and lanterns swaying in the breeze, she overheard Klein whispering to a shadowy figure in the shrubbery, "The codes arrive tonight. Ensure the drop at the Serpentine." Her pulse quickened. Espionage? The prelude to war had bred spies like weeds in a neglected garden? Hartley, ever attentive, escorted her through the crowd. "You seem distracted, my dear." "Merely observing the play of light on the water," she replied. "It reveals hidden depths." Determined to unravel the thread, Jane feigned illness the next day, allowing her to slip out disguised in a simple cloak and bonnet. She trailed Klein to the British Museum, where tourists milled among Egyptian mummies and Greek marbles. He lingered in the reading room, domed ceiling arching like a vast sky, slipping an envelope into a hollowed-out book on Prussian history. Jane, posing as a scholar with spectacles perched low, retrieved it after he departed. A cipher scrawled in invisible ink, visible only under heat. Back at her lodgings in Belgravia, a cozy apartment overlooking the square where nannies pushed prams and vendors hawked hot chestnuts, she warmed the paper over a candle. Symbols emerged, coordinates for a channel crossing, names of sympathizers. Hartley arrived for tea, bearing a bouquet of white lilies. "For my fiancé," he said, kissing her cheek. As they sat by the fire, flames crackling like secrets, Jane probed gently. "Tell me about Lieutenant Klein. His loyalties seem divided." Hartley's expression tightened. "A valued officer. Why do you ask?" "Curiosity," she said, pouring tea, but her mind whirred. Hartley's ring bore a subtle engraving matching a symbol in the cipher, a double-headed eagle. Suspicion deepened during a weekend at Hartley's family estate in Surrey, a sprawling manor of red brick and ivy-cloaked towers surrounded by woods where deer roamed freely. The party included Blackwood, Klein, and society guests for a hunt. Dawn broke with mist rising from the fields, hounds baying eagerly. Jane, opting out of the ride, wandered the grounds discovering a hidden pavilion where Klein met a courier on horseback. "The plans for the dreadnoughts," he hissed, "delivered to Berlin." Jane concealed herself behind a yew hedge, thorns pricking her skin like warnings. The courier galloped off, but she memorized his features: a beak-like nose, a limp in his left leg. That night, at a formal dinner in the great hall, candlelight flickering on silver epergnes laden with fruits, venison roasted to perfection, tension simmered. Blackwood raised a glass. "To king and country." Klein echoed faintly, his eyes darting to Hartley. Jane, seated beside her fiancé, noticed his hand tremble slightly as he cut into his pheasant. After dessert, plum pudding flambéed with brandy, she excused herself, slipping into Hartley's study. Mahogany panels gleamed, bookshelves heavy with military tomes. In a locked drawer, forced open with a hairpin, she found a ledger, payments to Klein, coded messages referencing Operation Eagle's Shadow. Hartley was no protector. He was the ring's linchpin, using their engagement as cover for treason. Confrontation demanded cunning. Jane orchestrated a private tea the following afternoon in the estate's conservatory, glass walls enclosing exotic palms and blooming camellias, the air humid and fragrant. She invited Hartley alone, under pretense of discussing wedding plans. Scones arrived, along with a pot of Assam tea she had personally prepared, laced subtly with a harmless emetic from the apothecary, masked by honey. As they sipped, Hartley expounded on their future. "We'll travel after the wedding, perhaps to the Riviera." Jane set down her cup. "Or to Berlin. Your ledger suggests divided allegiances." His face drained of color. "What nonsense! The cipher from the museum, the pavilion meeting. You're feeding secrets to the enemy." Hartley rose, knocking over his chair. "You meddlesome fool! This engagement was to keep you silent, not pry." He reached for a concealed pistol in his desk, but the emetic took effect, sweats, nausea, crumpling him to the floor. Jane had alerted Scotland Yard anonymously via telegram, posing as a concerned servant. Inspectors burst in, cuffs crinking like final judgments. Klein and Blackwood were rounded up in a simultaneous raid, the courier intercepted at Dover. the espionage ring dismantled, naval secrets secured. In the aftermath, as autumn winds stripped the trees bare, Jane broke the engagement publicly, citing irreconcilable differences. Society buzzed anew, but with admiration for her fortitude. Hartley, disgraced, faced trial. His parting gift, a locket engraved with the eagle, arrived mysteriously, containing a microfilm of unfinished codes. Back in St. Mary Mead years later, Miss Marple fingered the locket, its secrets abridged to deeper pasts. Independence reclaimed, the chapter sealed with triumph, though echoes of war loomed.
Chapter 3. The Enigmatic Engagement. Full. In the tranquil confines of Primrose Cottage, Miss Marple placed the Venetian postcard aside, its threat a ripple disturbing the calm surface of her memories. The vengeful words from Lorenzo had manifested not in direct confrontation, but in insidious rumors that seeped through London's elite circles like ink in water. By 1913, at 25, Jane Marple navigated a world on the brink, where alliances formed in ballrooms could shatter on battlefields. To staunch the flow of scandal, accusations of unseemly conduct in Venice, likely planted by Valtieri's agents, she entered a calculated engagement with Captain Desmond Hartley, whose military standing offered a shield of respectability. The announcement unfolded at the Dowager Countess's soirée, a glittering affair in Mayfair. The townhouse's entrance hall boasted marble statues of Greek gods, ushering guests into a ballroom where mirrors multiplied the candlelight infinitely. Jane's gown, sapphire blue with lace overlays, caught admiring glances. Aunt Lavinia, in pearl gray taffeta, squeezed her arm. "This will quash the gossip, mark my words." Hartley approached, his saber clinking softly. "Miss Marple, you outshine the chandeliers. May I have this dance?" The waltz carried them across the floor, skirts rustling like whispers. "These rumors are baseless. Engage with me, and my name will protect yours." "What prompts such gallantry?" Jane inquired, her eyes meeting his. "A mutual benefit. You gain repute, I a partner of intellect." Post-announcement, toasts rang out. "To the happy couple," the Countess proclaimed, her fan fluttering. But shadows lingered. Hartley's duties involved late-night visitors, men in overcoats slipping through side doors. Jane, staying at Aunt Lavinia's residence, overheard fragments. The Archduke's visit, codes must be secure. A regimental parade in Hyde Park provided clarity. Flags snapped in the wind, crowds cheering as troops drilled. Hartley introduced Blackwood and Klein. "Major, Lieutenant, meet my fiancée." Blackwood bowed stiffly. "Charmed. These are tense times. Vigilance is paramount." Klein's kiss lingered. "Enchanted. Your beauty rivals the Rhine's valleys." At the tea room, amid clinking silverware, talk veered to Europe. "Austria's ambitions threaten balance," Hartley noted. Jane interjected. "And loyalties? They can shift like sands." Klein laughed uneasily. "True, but ours are steadfast." The diplomatic reception amplified doubts. Gardens alive with string quartets playing Strauss, guests in formal attire mingling under arbors. Jane, in ivory chiffon, wandered catching Klein's exchange. "Drop at midnight, boathouse." She confided in no one, instead trailing Klein the next day to the museum. The reading room's hush contrasted the outer bustle. She watched him deposit the envelope, then claimed it, heart racing. At home, amid the square's everyday symphony, children's laughter, horse hooves, she decoded it, troop movements, alliance pacts. "Hartley's visit brought lilies, symbols of purity," he said. Tea poured, Jane tested. Klein seems foreign in spirit. "An asset," Hartley replied, but his knuckles whitened. The estate weekend escalated. Surrey's countryside rolled green, the manor a bastion of history. Huntsmen gathered at dawn, horns blaring. Jane explored, discovering the pavilion intrigue, naval blueprints to Hamburg. Dinner's opulence, crystal goblets, courses of consommé, roast beef, trifle, masked tension. To empire, toasts echoed. Jane's conservatory trap, tea infused with ipecac, not poison, to induce confession through illness. Hartley's collapse, authorities' arrival, ring exposed. Engagement dissolved, Locket's arrival hinting more. In reflection, Miss Marple closed the chapter, Independence, her prize.
Chapter 4. Village Veils and Vanished Dreams. In the cozy nook of Primrose Cottage, where the hearth crackled with the last embers of a dying fire and the clock ticked like a patient heartbeat, Miss Marple examined the eagle-engraved locket from her ill-fated engagement. The microfilm within, now safely destroyed after its secrets were handed to authorities, had whispered of betrayals far beyond Captain Hartley's grasp. Yet its arrival stirred older echoes, pulling her mind to the rural idyll of her late 20s in 1919, when the Great War's scars still etched the English countryside. Fresh from the chaos of espionage, Jane Marple had retreated to the village of Willowbrook, a cluster of thatched roofs and winding lanes nestled in the Cotswolds, seeking solace amid rolling meadows and ancient stone walls. There she became entangled in the enigma of a vanished debutante, Amelia Fairchild, whose disappearance amid feuding estates and whispered fortunes unveiled layers of rural rivalry and hidden passions. The locket's faint inscription, "Wings over Willow," had unlocked a floodgate. Miss Marple rose, her shawl slipping like a sigh, and retrieved a faded journal from her bookshelf. Flipping through its pages, yellowed like autumn birch, she surrendered to the past. It began with her arrival in Willowbrook, invited by her distant relative, Mrs. Henrietta Langford, a widow whose manor overlooked the village green. The train from London chugged into the tiny station, steam billowing like ghosts fleeing the platform. Jane stepped down, her suitcase light with essentials, books, a few dresses, and her ever-present knitting bag. The air carried the earthy perfume of plowed fields and wood smoke, a balm after the city's clamor. Henrietta greeted her with a warm embrace, her face lined with the quiet grief of a war that had claimed her son. "Jane, dear, Willowbrook will mend your spirit, but mind the old grudges, they simmer like forgotten pots." The drive to Langford Manor wound through orchards heavy with ripening apples, golden orbs dangling like forbidden temptations. The house itself was a rambling structure of honey-colored stone, its windows framed by climbing ivy that rustled secrets in the breeze. Settling in, Jane explored the village, the pub, the Golden Sheaf, where locals nursed pints of cider and swapped tales, the church with its lopsided steeple, bells pealing irregularly, and the market square, alive with stalls selling cheeses veined like marble and jams bubbling in copper pots. It was there she first heard of Amelia Fairchild. A cluster of women in floral aprons gossiped over baskets of eggs. 10 years since she vanished, one said, her voice a conspiratorial hush, right after that harvest ball at Fairchild Hall,
They say she took the family jewels and fled with a lover. Another clucked her tongue. Or worse, the Rivertons did her in. Old feud over land boundaries, you know. Buried treasure from the Civil War, hidden in the woods between their estates. Jane lingered, feigning interest in a wheel of cheddar. Sounds tragic. Was she ever found? The women exchanged glances. Not a trace. Her father, Squire Fairchild, searches still, poor soul, blames the Rivertons to this day. Intrigued, Jane delved deeper. That evening, over supper of shepherd's pie steaming with herbs and gravy, Henrietta elaborated. Amelia was the belle of Willowbrook, golden hair, eyes like summer skies. Engaged to young Edmund Riverton, but the families warred over a strip of woodland said to hold Cromwell's gold. She disappeared the night of the ball, her room empty save for a torn gown. Jane's fork paused mid-air. No clues? Footprints? Letters? Only rumors. Some swear they saw her ghost by the river. Others claim elopement with a traveling artist. The next day, Jane donned a plain tweed skirt and blouse, pinning her hair under a wide-brimmed hat to blend in as a harmless visitor. She strolled to Fairchild Hall, a grand Georgian pile with manicured lawns sweeping to a trout stream. Posing as a botanist sketching wildflowers, she chatted with the gardener, old Mr. Thorne, coincidentally sharing a surname with her past nemesis, though no relation. His hands, garneled like tree roots, paused on his shears. Miss Amelia? Aye, she loved the herb garden, planted lavender herself. Night she vanished, I saw lights in the folly, that old tower in the woods. Jane's eyes sharpened. Anyone with her? He shrugged. Shadows, miss. But the Rivertons' poacher was about. Shifty fellow named Silas. Thanking him with a coin, Jane ventured into the disputed woods, where oaks towered like ancient guardians, their branches interlacing in a green cathedral. Sunlight dappled the forest floor, alive with bluebells nodding in the undergrowth. She found the folly, a ruined stone tower overgrown with brambles, its door ajar. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light, and on a crumbling ledge she spotted a carved initial, A.F., entwined with an E. Pocketing a loose stone etched with faint markings, she pressed on to Riverton Grange, a stark Tudor manor with mullioned windows glowering like suspicious eyes. She knocked, claiming to be collecting folklore for a book. Lady Riverton received her in the parlor, walls hung with portraits of stern ancestors. Folklore? We've plenty. Curses on the Fairchilds for stealing our land. That girl, Amelia, ran off, mark my words. Took our heirlooms too, or so the whispers go. Jane sipped the offered sherry, its warmth spreading like curiosity. Heirlooms, like buried treasure? Lady Riverton's lips thinned. Legends, but my son Edmund, he was heartbroken, swore she'd been kidnapped. As Jane departed, she noticed Edmund in the stables, a brooding figure polishing a saddle. His eyes, shadowed by loss, met hers. You're the newcomer, asking about Amelia? Her story fascinates. Any mementos left? He hesitated, then pulled a silk ribbon from his pocket, blue, frayed at the ends. From her hair, that last night, she whispered of escape, but from what? The ribbon's scent, faint jasmine, evoked a plan. That night, under a moon veiled by clouds, Jane returned to the woods, lantern dimmed. The river murmured nearby, its banks slick with moss. She followed a faint path to an abandoned mill, wheels silent and overgrown. Inside,
Amid rusted gears and cobwebs, she discovered a hidden compartment behind a loose plank, a bundle of letters tied with twine. The missives in elegant script revealed Amelia's voice. "Dearest E, the family's hatred poisons our love. Meet me at the Folly. We'll flee to Paris, jewels in hand to start anew." But the last letter unfinished. Danger lurks. Silas knows. Jane's breath caught. Silas the poacher, perhaps a blackmailer. She tucked the letters away, heart pounding as twigs snapped outside. Hiding in the shadows, she watched Silas slink by, spade over shoulder, digging furtively near the riverbank. He unearthed a small chest, glinting with what looked like coins. The fabled treasure? Confrontation brewed. Jane rallied allies, Henrietta for local knowledge, Mr. Thorne for access. Disguised as a washerwoman with a basket of linens, she infiltrated Riverton Grange's laundry, overhearing servants. Silas brags of riches found that night. Saw Miss Amelia arguing with young Master Edmund, something about the treasure map. Piecing it, Amelia and Edmund planned elopement, using the treasure to fund their escape. But Silas, spying, demanded a share. A struggle ensued. Jane arranged a clandestine meeting at the churchyard, under pretense of a memorial for war dead. Edmund arrived, collar turned against the chill. Why summon me? She produced the ribbon and letters. Amelia didn't vanish alone. What happened at the Folly? His shoulders slumped. We argued. She wanted to take the treasure, but I feared the curse. Silas
Interrupted, greedy. In the scuffle, she fled across the river, swearing to wait in the next village. I thought she'd return. But she didn't? Jane pressed. Because Silas pursued? Edmund nodded. He claimed she drowned, but I never believed. Hid the chest to silence him. The truth demanded excavation. With constables summoned discreetly, Jane's note citing lost property, they converged on the mill. Silas, cornered, confessed. I chased her, but she crossed safe, took a boat down river, left me with naught but threats. Proof emerged from Amelia's forgotten diary, hidden in the Folly's rafters, entries of her journey to London, then France, under a new name, free at last with love's fortune. Telegrams confirmed Amelia alive in Paris, married to a painter. The treasure mere heirlooms, sold legally. The families reconciled over tea at Langford Manor, feuds dissolved like sugar in hot brew. Squire Fairchild wept joyfully. Lady Riverton offered apologies. Jane, her role unveiled, received quiet thanks. "You've lifted the veil, Miss Marple," Edmund said. "Peace for us all." As she departed Willowbrook, the village ghosts laid to rest. A wartime postcard arrived, echoing codes from her espionage days, beckoning deeper. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple closed the journal, the chapter's dreams unvanished, satisfaction blooming like wildflowers in a mended meadow.
Chapter 5. The Forgotten Codebreaker. In the quiet embrace of Primrose Cottage, where the scent of lavender drifted from the garden and the soft glow of a single lamp illuminated her knitting, Miss Marple sat with the postcard from Willowbrook, its cryptic wartime echo stirring memories long buried. The words, scrawled in a hurried hand, hinted at secrets from her past. The eagle's shadow lingers where codes were born. At 70-something, her fingers paused on the wool. Her mind drifted to 1940, when she was 46 and the world trembled under the weight of war. England's skies roared with Spitfires, and in a secluded manner turned covert outpost, Jane Marple had donned the guise of a knitting spinster to become an unsung codebreaker. Amid air raid sirens and the shadow of betrayal, she unraveled a cipher that could have altered the war's tide, a chapter of her life cloaked in secrecy until now. The memory unfolded like a reel of film, grainy but vivid. It began with a summons, delivered not by post but by a bespectacled man in a nondescript suit who appeared at her London flat one rainy afternoon. The Blitz had scarred the city. Craters yawned where townhouses once stood, and the air smelled of ash and defiance. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, "your knack for patterns has reached certain ears. We need you at Ashwood Grange, a discreet operation. Pack light." Jane, dressed in a sensible tweed coat, arrived at the Grange by a rattling military truck, its canvas flapping like a trapped bird. Nestled in Buckinghamshire's rolling hills, the manor was a labyrinth of ivy-clad stone, its windows blacked out to defy Luftwaffe bombers. Inside, the air buzzed with urgency. Typewriters clattered, teleprinters hummed, and young women in cardigans hunched over desks littered with graph paper and slide rules. Colonel Percival Wright, a wiry man with a perpetual frown, briefed her in a room smelling of pipe tobacco and damp plaster. "You're here to crack German ciphers, Miss Marple. Enigma's their beast, complex but not unbreakable. Your cover? A librarian cataloging rare books. Questions?" Jane's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Only whether the tea is strong enough to fuel such work." Assigned to Hut 7, a drafty wooden annex, she joined a team of misfits: Evelyn Carter, a mathematician with ink-stained fingers; Roger Henshaw, a linguist who muttered Latin curses; and Clara Beaumont, a vicar's daughter whose serene smile masked a razor-sharp mind. Their task was daunting, deciphering intercepted messages encrypted by the Enigma machine, its rotors spinning secrets like a mechanical spider's web. Jane's knitting needles clicked rhythmically, a prop to soothe suspicion, as she studied code sheets under a flickering bulb. Days blurred into nights, punctuated by air raid drills that sent them scurrying to a damp cellar where they swapped stories over thermos flasks of tepid cocoa. Evelyn confided, "My brother is in the RAF. Every code we break might save him." Roger scoffed, "Or hasten our doom. The Germans adapt faster than we can." Clara, ever calm, offered, "Faith and focus, Roger. Patterns reveal themselves to the patient." Jane nodded, her mind mapping the chaos of letters into grids. She noticed anomalies, repeated phrases in German signals, suggesting a flaw in their cipher discipline. One message, intercepted from a U-boat off Dover, haunted her. "Operation Nachtvogel proceeds. Coordinates secure." The name, Nightbird, echoed in intelligence briefings as a potential invasion plan. Her breakthrough came during a sleepless night, rain drumming on the hut's tin roof. While others slept, Jane pored over the intercept, her knitting abandoned. Using a stolen moment at the manor's library, she cross-referenced German naval terms with a smuggled codebook, a relic from a captured submarine. A pattern emerged. The cipher's key shifted daily, but the U-boat's operator had reused an old setting, a careless slip. By dawn, she'd cracked the first layer, revealing coordinates off the Norfolk coast. She presented her findings to Colonel Wright, who squinted at her scrawled notes. "Remarkable, Miss Marple. If this holds, we've a chance to ambush their fleet. But we need the full message, troop movements, timing." The stakes soared. Her days filled with clandestine tasks, cross-checking signals with Bletchley's mainframe, a hulking machine nicknamed the Beast that whirred like an angry hive. She slipped coded notes to couriers under guise of borrowing books, her librarian act flawless. Yet suspicion crept in. Clara, her closest ally, began acting strangely, arriving late, her eyes darting to locked drawers. One evening, as they sorted intercepts in Hut 7, Jane caught Clara pocketing a decrypt. "Lost in thought, dear?" she asked lightly. Clara flushed. "Just organizing. So many papers." But Jane's instincts, honed in Venice and Willowbrook, flared. She shallowed Clara to the manor's stables, where moonlight revealed her passing a note to a groundskeeper, a wiry man named Harris, whose limp suggested a war wound. Jane overheard fragments. "Berlin must know. Sabotage the decrypts." Betrayal stung like frost. Clara, the devout codebreaker, was a double agent. She confided in Evelyn, who gasped, "Clara? She's like my sister." "We trust too easily," Jane replied, "but proof comes first." Her plan unfolded with precision. She crafted a false decrypt, laced with misleading coordinates for a fictional Allied convoy, and left it where Clara would find it. To test Harris, she orchestrated a staged air raid drill, ensuring he'd be caught delivering the fake to a contact in the nearby village. Disguised in a groundskeeper's smock, Jane trailed him to a pub, the Black Stag, where smoke curled like secrets and locals sang raucous shanties. Harris slipped the decrypt to a man in a fedora who vanished into the night. Jane alerted Colonel Wright via a coded telegram sent from a village postbox under cover of buying stamps. "Urgent. Hut 7 compromised. Intercept at Black Stag." The trap sprang at midnight. Military police stormed the pub, nabbing Harris and his contact, a German operative posing as a grain merchant. Clara, confronted in the hut, broke down, tears streaking her face. "My brother is a prisoner in Munich. They promised his release if I cooperated." Jane's voice was gentle but firm. "You chose poorly, Clara. Lives hang on our work." The aftermath was swift. Clara was detained, her role hushed to preserve morale. The true Nacht-Vogel decrypt, completed by Jane's relentless analysis, revealed a German flotilla massing near Norway, a feint to divert Allied ships. Her work enabled a counterstrike, sinking 3 U-boats and averting a coastal assault. Colonel Wright offered rare praise. "You've saved thousands, Miss Marple. Your name won't grace history books, but we know." Jane requested anonymity, returning to her knitting as the war raged on. Ashwood Grange faded into routine, her role buried in classified files. But a parting gift arrived, a coded note tucked in her knitting bag. "Nightbird sings no more, but shadows watch." The handwriting matched Clara's. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple set the postcard aside, the memory, a tapestry of duty woven with loss. The cipher's triumph secured England's shores, but Clara's betrayal lingered, a wound that whispered of personal costs yet to unfold.
Chapter 5. The Forgotten Codebreaker. Expanded. In the quiet embrace of Primrose Cottage, where the hearth's dying embers cast flickering shadows and the lavender scent drifted through an open window, Miss Marple held the Willowbrook postcard, its wartime echo stirring a past she'd long sealed away. The cryptic phrase, "The eagle's shadow lingers where codes were born," pointed to 1940, when she was 46, and England stood defiant against a darkening sky. The Great War's echoes had shaped her youth, but the Second World War forged her in secrecy. Recruited as a codebreaker at Ashwood Grange, a covert outpost cloaked in Buckinghamshire's green folds, Jane Marple had masqueraded as a knitting librarian to unravel German enigma ciphers. Amid air raids and a traitor's shadow, she thwarted a catastrophic plot, her quiet triumph buried in classified silence until this moment. The memory unfurled like a coded scroll. It began in London, September 1940, the Blitz painting the skyline with fire. Jane's flat in Bloomsbury, a modest space filled with books and a single geranium, trembled as bombs fell nearby, windows rattling like chattering teeth. A knock came at dusk, a man in a gray suit, spectacles fogged by rain. "Miss Jane Marple?"
His voice was clipped, urgent. "Your talent for puzzles is known to us. Report to Ashwood Grange. Discretion is paramount." Jane packed a small case, wool skirts, a shawl, her knitting bag, a prop for anonymity. The journey, in a military truck bouncing over rutted roads, ended at a manor hidden by ancient elms. Ashwood Grange loomed, its sandstone walls weathered by centuries, blackout curtains shrouding its secrets. Inside, chaos reigned quietly, officers barking orders, typists hammering keys, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the tang of ink. Colonel Percival Wright, lean as a greyhound, met her in the library, shelves groaning with leather-bound tomes. "You're no ordinary spinster, Miss Marple. Your work in Willowbrook reached intelligence ears. Patterns, deductions. We're breaking Enigma, the German cipher machine. Your cover, cataloging our archives. Clear?" Jane adjusted her spectacles. "As clear as a cipher without a key. Shall I start?" Assigned to Hut 7, a wooden shack behind the manor, she joined an eclectic crew. Evelyn Carter, a Cambridge mathematician, scribbled equations with manic energy, her auburn hair pinned haphazardly. Roger Henshaw, a linguist with a poet's beard, muttered Ovid under his breath. Clara Beaumont, serene as a saint, prayed before each shift, her fingers tracing a silver cross. Their mission decoded intercepts that could shift the war, U-boat positions, troop movements, invasion plans. Jane's knitting needles clicked rhythmically, a ruse to blend in as she studied code sheets. The enigma's complexity was a labyrinth, each letter scrambled by rotors, keys changing daily. Intercepts arrived in bursts, scribbled on flimsy paper. Nachtvogelt zurufen, Koordinaten sicher. Nightbird. An operation whispered in briefings as a potential coastal strike. Life at the Grange was a strange rhythm. Dawn brought porridge and weak tea in the mess hall, where officers debated Churchill's speeches. Nights meant air raid drills, the team huddling in a cellar lit by a single bulb, sharing stories to drown out distant explosions. Evelyn spoke of her pilot brother, her voice trembling. "He's up there dodging Messerschmitts. Our codes might guide him home." Roger snorted, sipping contraband brandy, "or send us all to ruin. The Germans are devils with their machines." Clara's calm countered him. "Trust in purpose, Roger. Every letter we crack is a prayer answered." Jane silently mapped codes in her mind, her knitting a metronome. She noticed patterns, repeated salutations and naval signals, suggesting operator errors. One intercept, from a U-boat off Dover, obsessed her. Nachtvogel advances. Coordinates secured. Nightbird. An operation whispered in briefings as a potential coastal strike. Her breakthrough came during a storm, thunder shaking the hut's timbers. Alone, with rain lashing the windows, Jane aligned the intercept with known keys. The U-boat's operator had reused a setting from June, a rare lapse. By lamplight, she decoded coordinates, a flotilla massing near Great Yarmouth. She rushed to White, her notes clutched like treasure. "It's a staging point, sir. If we act, we can intercept." White's eyes narrowed, promising. "But we need the full plan. Dates, ships. Keep at it." The task intensified. Jane liaised with Bletchley Park via encrypted telegrams, her librarian guys allowing late-night library visits. She slipped notes to couriers in book margins, her movements shadowed by the manor's creaking halls. But Clara's behavior shifted, late arrivals, nervous glances. One night, Jane saw her hide a decrypt in her Bible, a flash of guilt in her eyes. "Careless with papers, Clara?" Jane asked, offering tea. Clara stammered, "Just tidying. So much clutter." Suspicion rooted. Jane followed Clara to the stables, where starlight revealed her passing a note to Harris, the groundskeeper. His limp, his furtive nod, Jane overheard. "Berlin needs this. Disrupt the convoy plans." Betrayal burned. Jane confided in Evelyn over a midnight cigarette, the smoke curling like doubt.
Clara? A traitor? Evelyn whispered. She's my rock. Rocks can crack, Jane said. We'll need a trap. Jane forged a decoyed decrypt, false convoy routes to Iceland, and left it in Clara's desk. She staged a drill, ensuring Harris would deliver it. Disguised in a borrowed smock, she trailed him to the Black Stag, its windows glowing amber. Inside, locals sang over foaming pints, unaware of espionage. Harris passed the decoy to a man in a fedora who slipped into the fog. Jane's telegram to White was swift. Compromise in Hut 7, Black Stag, midnight. Military police raided Harris and his contact, a German agent named Mueller. Clara, confronted, wept. My brother is an Astalog. They swore freedom for secrets. Jane's voice held steady. You traded lives for hope, Clara. A heavy price. Clara's arrest was hushed, morale preserved. Jane's final decrypt, completed in a sleepless marathon, revealed Noct Vogel's feint, a diversion to lure Allied ships, masking a Norwegian assault. Her work enabled a preemptive strike, sinking key U-boats. White offered a medal, declined. Keep my name from records, Colonel. I prefer shadows. As she left Ashwood, a note appeared in her knitting, Clara's hand, warning of unseen watchers. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple closed the chapter, her triumph a silent shield for England, yet whispering of personal losses to come.
Chapter 6. Echoes from the Trenches. In the quiet sanctuary of Primrose Cottage, where the autumn wind whispered through the shutters and the scent of damp earth mingled with the roses, Miss Marple sat by her hearth, the coded note from Ashwood Grange resting on her lap. Its cryptic warning, shadows watch, had stirred a deeper wound, one etched in the muddy fields of the Great War. At 70-something, her eyes traced the familiar contours of her parlor, but her mind drifted to 1918, when she was 30, a young woman whose heart bore the weight of loss. The postcard's echo had awakened memories of her brother, Lieutenant Arthur Marple, lost in the Somme carnage. What she had believed was a soldier's sacrifice revealed itself as a tangled web of corruption and smuggled artifacts, a secret she unraveled through quiet courage in the war's fading days. This chapter of her life, steeped in grief and grit, would resolve a family wound but open a door to further mysteries. The memory unfolded like a letter creased from years of folding. It began in London, late autumn 1918, as church bells rang for the armistice, their peals mingling with cheers and tears. Jane lived in a modest flat near Russell Square, its walls papered in faded roses, where she worked as a volunteer nurse's aide, bandaging wounds and penning letters for soldiers too broken to write. Arthur's death 2 years prior had left a hollow in her chest, his last letter scribbled in a trench, smudged with mud, her only keepsake. Keep the home fires burning, Jane. He'll be back for Christmas. The telegram announcing his death followed, stark and final. Killed in action, July 1916. But whispers reached her through the hospital wards, where maimed men swapped tales over mugs of watery tea. A patient, Private Tom Harrow, a wiry lad with a missing leg, spoke of Arthur. Your brother, miss, brave as they come, but something queer about his last patrol. Captain Strathmore led it, shifty sort, always nattering about ancient relics he'd seen in Cairo. Jane's brow furrowed, her knitting needles pausing. Relics? In a trench? Aye, talked of gold coins, Roman or summit, buried in no man's land. Said they'd make us rich. Your Arthur argued with him, called it looting. Next day, he was gone. Suspicion took root like a weed in cracked earth. Jane visited the War Office, a cavernous building smelling of wax and bureaucracy, seeking Strathmore's records. A clerk, hurried and ink-stained, handed her a file. Captain Lionel Strathmore, decorated, but under investigation for irregularities in supply chains. No mention of artifacts, but a note flagged his last posting near Arras, where Arthur fell.
Determined, Jane secured passage to France, posing as a Red Cross volunteer delivering medical supplies. The Channel crossing was rough, waves crashing like artillery, the ferry reeking of oil and salt. A Ross greeted her with devastation, shattered villages, fields churned to mud, poppies blooming defiant in the ruin. She lodged in a convent turned hospital, its stone walls echoing with the moans of the wounded. Nuns in starched habits glided past, their prayers a soft counterpoint to the clatter of bedpans. Her cover allowed access to soldiers returning from the front. Over bowls of thin soup and a makeshift canteen, she befriended Sergeant Michael O'Connell, a burly Irishman with a crooked nose and a knack for storytelling. "You're after Strathmore, eh?" he said, stirring his broth. "Heard he was trading with deserters, coins, statues, God knows what. Smuggled 'em through Calais in ammo crates." Jane's eyes narrowed, her knitting needles pausing. "Relics? In a trench?" "Aye. Talked of gold coins, Roman or summit, buried in no man's land. Said they'd make us rich. Your Arthur argued with him, called it looting. Next day, he was gone." Suspicion took root like a weed in cracked earth. Jane visited the War Office, a cavernous building smelling of wax and bureaucracy, seeking Strathmore's records. A clerk, hurried and ink-stained, handed her a file. Captain Lionel Strathmore, decorated, but under investigation for irregularities in supply chains. No mention of artifacts, but a note flagged his last posting near Arras, where Arthur fell. Determined, Jane secured passage to France, posing as a Red Cross volunteer delivering medical supplies. The Channel crossing was rough, waves crashing like artillery, the ferry reeking of oil and salt. Arras greeted her with devastation, shattered villages, fields churned to mud, poppies blooming defiant in the ruin. She lodged in a convent turned hospital, its stone walls echoing with the moans of the wounded. Nuns in starched habits glided past, their prayers a soft counterpoint to the clatter of bedpans. Her cover allowed access to soldiers returning from the front. Over bowls of thin soup and a makeshift canteen, she befriended Sergeant Michael O'Connell, a burly Irishman with a crooked nose and a knack for storytelling. "You're after Strathmore, eh?" he said, stirring his broth. "Heard he was trading with deserters, coins, statues, God knows what. Smuggled 'em through Calais in ammo crates." Jane's eyes narrowed. "And my brother?" O'Connell sighed. "Arthur caught him at it. Night patrol, they found a cache, Roman gold, buried since Caesar. Strathmore wanted to sell it. Your brother threatened to report him. Next morn, a sniper got him, or so Strathmore claimed." The convent's garden, bare but for a lone willow, became Jane's sanctuary. She sat on a cracked bench, knitting a scarf for a shivering orderly, her mind piecing clues. Strathmore's current post was a supply depot near Amiens, a hub for repatriating troops. She hitched a ride in an ambulance, the driver a cheerful cockney named Alf. "Off to find trouble, miss?" he teased, dodging shell craters. The depot was a sprawl of tents and crates, air thick with dust and the tang of petrol. Jane in her nurse's apron blended among medics and quartermasters. Strathmore, now a major, strutted in polished boots, barking orders. His tent was a trove of oddities, maps, ledgers, and a locked chest emitting a faint metallic clink when bumped. Jane, offering to bandage a cut on his orderly's hand, glimpsed a ledger entry. Arras hoard, 50 gold aurei, sold to Parisian dealer. Her plan crystallized. She needed evidence, but Strathmore was wary, his eyes scanning like a hawk's. At dusk, as lorries rumbled out with supplies, she slipped into his tent, heart pounding like a drum. The chest's lock yielded to a pearpin, revealing coins glinting like captured stars, etched with Roman emperors. A notebook detailed sales, names, dates, and a chilling note. Marple's patrol silenced, sniper arranged. Horror gripped her, but footsteps approached. She hid under a canvas tarp, breath shallow as Strathmore entered, with a stranger, a Frenchman in a tailored coat, voice smooth as cognac. "The next shipment, Major. My buyers in Zurich are eager." "Soon, Monsieur Dubois, but we must be cautious. Rumors of a nosy nurse." Jane's blood ran cold. She waited until they left, then pocketed the notebook, replacing it with a blank one to delay suspicion. Escape was perilous. Guards patrolled, dogs barked. She crept through a drainage ditch, mud soaking her skirts, emerging in a copse where stars pierced the sky like bullet holes. Back at the convent, she confided in O'Connell, who whistled low. "You've got guts, miss. Strathmore's connected. Brass won't touch him without proof." "Then we'll get it," Jane said, her voice steel. She crafted a trap, using her Red Cross status to request a meeting with a military inspector, Captain Eleanor Grayson, a no-nonsense woman with a penchant for justice. Jane sent a coded letter via a courier, a boy on a bicycle who thought it a love note detailing Strathmore's crimes. "Meet at Amiens Cathedral, midnight." The cathedral loomed, its spires ghostly in moonlight, stained glass dark but for flickers of vigil candles. Jane, cloaked in a borrowed habit, waited in a pew, her knitting a shield. Grayson arrived, her boots echoing. "This better be solid, Miss Marple. Accusing an officer is no lark." Jane handed her the notebook. "Murder and theft, Captain. My brother's blood stains these pages." Grayson's jaw tightened. If true, he's done. They staged a sting. Jane posed as a buyer's agent, using Dubois' name, and lured Strathmore to a derelict barn outside Amiens. The air smelled of hay and decay, moonlight slanting through broken rafters. Strathmore arrived, chest in tow, expecting a deal. "You've the funds?" he growled. Jane veiled, nodded. "Show me the goods." As he opened the chest, Grayson's men surged from the shadows, rifles gleaming. Strathmore drew a pistol, but O'Connell tackled him, pinning him in the dust. "For Arthur, you bastard!" he spat. The trial was swift, hushed to avoid scandal. Strathmore faced a court-martial, stripped of rank, imprisoned. The artifacts, Roman coins, a bronze statuette of Minerva, were repatriated to museums. Jane attended the hearing, her testimony
delivered in a clear voice, though her hands trembled in her lap. Arthur's name was cleared, his death ruled a murder, not a casualty. Returning to London, Jane visited his grave in a quiet churchyard, laying a poppy wreath. "Rest now, dear," she whispered, the wind carrying her words. A survivor's letter arrived weeks later from O'Connell, now demobbed. "You gave us justice, miss, but Strathmore had friends. Watch your back." In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple closed the memory, the echo of her brother's honor restored, a satisfying peace amid whispers of new shadows.
Chapter 6. Echoes from the Trenches, expanded. In the tranquil haven of Primrose Cottage, where the autumn wind sighed through the shutters and the hearth's embers glowed like fading stars, Miss Marple held the coded note from Ashwood Grange, its warning, "Shadows watch," a key to a locked chamber of her heart. The postcard's wartime echo had stirred a deeper grief, one tied to her brother, Lieutenant Arthur Marple, lost in the Great War's mud and madness. At 70-something, her fingers traced the note's edges, her mind slipping to 1918, when she was 30, a volunteer nurse's aide in a London scarred by sacrifice. What she had mourned as a soldier's death revealed itself as a murder cloaked in greed, tied to smuggled Roman artifacts. Through quiet resolve, Jane unraveled a conspiracy, restoring her brother's honor in a chapter of grit and redemption. The memory began in London, November 1918, as armistice bells rang, their joy tempered by the city's wounds. Jane's Bloomsbury flat, a cozy nook with sagging bookshelves and a single geranium in a cracked pot, trembled with distant celebrations. She worked at St. Thomas's Hospital, rolling bandages, soothing fevered brows, and writing letters for soldiers whose hands could no longer grip a pen. Arthur's death in 1916 haunted her. His last letter, ink blurred by rain, promised a Christmas reunion that never came. "Keep the light on, Jane," he wrote. The telegram followed, Lieutenant A. Marple, killed in action, Somme. But whispers in the wards sowed doubt. Private Tom Harrow, a wiry lad from Devon, his leg lost to shrapnel, spoke over a cigarette in the hospital garden, its bare branches stark against the gray sky. "Your brother, miss, a proper gent, stood up to Captain Strathmore, a right snake. Kept bragging about old coins he'd dug up. Roman, he said. Arthur called it thievin'. Next day, sniper got him." Jane's knitting paused, her needles glinting in the weak sun. "Coins? In a war zone?" "Buried in a trench, miss. Strathmore reckoned they'd fetch a fortune. Your brother wanted 'em reported, not sold." The seed of suspicion sprouted. Jane visited the War Office, navigating its marble halls where clerks shuffled papers like autumn leaves. A file on Strathmore revealed little, decorated but flagged for discrepancies in supplies near Arras, where Arthur died. Her resolve hardened. She'd go to France, find the truth. Posing as a Red Cross volunteer, Jane secured a berth on a supply ship crossing the Channel. The sea churned, waves crashing like gunfire, the air sharp with salt. Calais was a chaos of troops and lorries, the ground scarred by war. She hitched to Arras in a rattling ambulance, its driver humming, "Pack up your troubles." The convent hospital, a stone refuge amid rubble, housed wounded men and weary nuns. Sister Agnes, her face lined like a map, offered a cot. "Rest, child. War leaves no one untouched." Her cover, delivering bandages, let her mingle with soldiers. In the canteen, over potato stew and stale bread, she met Sergeant Michael O'Connell, his Irish brogue warm as whiskey. "Strathmore's your man, a profiteer, mark my words. Smuggled relics through neutral ports, gold coins, bits of statues. Your brother crossed him, paid the price." Jane's heart clenched. "How do I prove it?" "Find his stash. He's at Amiens now, running supplies." The depot near Amiens was a maze of canvas tents and mud, the air heavy with diesel and sweat. Jane, in her nurse's apron, blended among medics, her knitting bag a constant prop. Strathmore, now a major, strode with arrogance, his mustache waxed to points. His tent held clues, a locked chest, maps marked with cryptic X's, a ledger half hidden under a greatcoat. While bandaging a corporal's arm, Jane glimpsed an entry, a Ross hoard, 50 ori, Paris dealer, 10,000 francs. Night fell, stars hidden by clouds. Jane slipped into the tent, the lock yielding to her harpen. Inside, coins gleamed, Roman emperors staring blankly beside a notebook listing sales and a damning note. Marple silenced, sniper paid. Footsteps froze her. She dove under a tarp, heart hammering as Strathmore entered with Dubois, a Parisian dealer in a velvet coat. "The Zurich deal's set," Dubois purred. "But this nurse, Marple's sister, she's asking questions." Strathmore growled, "I'll handle her." Jane escaped through a slit in the tent, mud caking her boots. She confided in O'Connell, who arranged a meeting with Captain Eleanor Grayson, an inspector with a hawk's gaze. In Amiens Cathedral, its arches soaring like prayers, Jane handed over the notebook. "Murder, theft, treason," she said. Grayson nodded. "We'll need him caught red-handed." The trap? Jane posed as Dubois' agent, luring Strathmore to a barn with a forged letter, promising a buyer. Moonlight illuminated the deal, Strathmore opening the chest, coins spilling. Grayson's squad stormed in, O'Connell disarming him. "For Arthur," he roared.
Strathmore's court-martial was swift, his disgrace buried in secrecy. The artifacts returned to history, Arthur's name cleared. Jane laid a wreath at his grave, whispering, "You're home now." O'Connell's letter warned of Strathmore's allies, a shadow trailing her. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple closed the chapter, Arthur's honor restored, a triumph tinged with the ache of loss, and whispers of secrets yet to unfold.
Chapter 7. The Silent Thou. In the stillness of Primrose Cottage, where the ticking of the mantel clock wove a gentle rhythm with the patter of rain against the windows, Miss Marple sat with the letter from Sergeant O'Connell, its warning of Strathmore's lingering allies a faint echo of past dangers. The firelight danced on her face, now etched with the wisdom of 70-odd years, as she traced the contours of her memories. The locket from her wartime code-breaking days, tucked away in a velvet-lined box, had stirred a deeper wound, one tied to a vow of solitude made in the ashes of post-war London. In 1920, at 32, Jane Marple had loved and lost, her heart ensnared by a fellow codebreaker, Thomas Ridley, whose death in a web of espionage and mistaken identities forced her to confront a conspiracy that threatened to unravel her fragile peace. This chapter, woven with heartbreak and cunning, would see her honor his memory with a private triumph, though it left threads of mystery yet to be pulled. The memory unfurled like a fog rolling off the Thames, thick with the scent of coal dust in despair. London in 1920 was a city reborn yet scarred, its streets alive with jazz from basement clubs and the clatter of trams, but haunted by the ghosts of the Great War. Jane lived in a modest boarding house in Bloomsbury, its wallpaper peeling like old skin, where she worked as a typist for a legal firm, her wartime heroics buried in secrecy. Thomas Ridley had been her confidant at Ashwood Grange, a soft-spoken man with wire-rimmed glasses and a mind that danced through ciphers like a poet through verse. Their bond, forged over late-night decrypts and shared thermos flasks, had blossomed into love, a quiet, unspoken promise sealed with a stolen kiss in the Manor's rose garden, under a sky torn by searchlights. His death came abruptly, a telegram as cold as the one that took her brother. Thomas Ridley, deceased, July 1919, suspected espionage, circumstances unclear. The official report claimed he'd been mistaken for a traitor and shot during a raid in Dover. But whispers reached Jane through former codebreakers. Thomas had uncovered a mole within their ranks, a double agent leaking secrets to a resurgent German faction. Grief drove her to silence, a vow to shun love and guard her heart. Yet the locket's microfilm, found years later, held a clue in Thomas's hand. The raven flies at dusk, trust none but the lark. Jane resolved to uncover the truth, her vow tested by the pull of justice. She began at the Imperial War Museum, where archives gathered dust like forgotten promises. Posing as a historian researching wartime intelligence, she sifted through declassified files, her spectacles perched low. A name emerged, Friedrich Müller, a German expatriate and suspected spymaster, now posing as a wine merchant in London's East End. His alias, the Raven, matched Thomas's note. Jane's pulse quickened. Müller had been at Dover, linked to the raid that killed Thomas. Her investigation led to Whitechapel, where the air smelled of fish markets and brewing hops. Disguised in a drab shawl and bonnet, she blended with street vendors hawking hot pies and newspapers. Muller's shop, a narrow storefront with bottles glinting in the window, buzzed with dock workers and sailors. Jane entered, feigning interest in a claret. Müller, a stout man with a scar snaking across his cheek, eyed her warily. "A fine vintage, madam, for a special occasion?" "Perhaps a memorial," Jane replied, her voice soft, "for a friend lost in Dover." His hand froze on the bottle, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. War took many, best not to dwell. Jane purchased the wine, noting a ledger behind the counter, its pages marked with cryptic symbols. She needed access. That evening she enlisted an old contact from Ashwood Grange, Evelyn Carter, now a journalist with a knack for sniffing out scandals. They met in a tea shop near Covent Garden, its tables crowded with actresses and poets, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the clink of porcelain. Evelyn, her auburn hair now streaked with gray, leaned forward. "You're chasing ghosts, Jane. Muller's untouchable, rumored to have friends in Parliament." "Then we'll haunt him," Jane said, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome. "Thomas died for a truth we must uncover." Their plan took shape over scones and Darjeeling. Evelyn's press pass could get them into a charity gala at the Savoy, where Muller was expected to court investors. Jane would pose as her assistant, a mousy clerk with typewriter's calluses. The gala was a spectacle, chandeliers dripping light like molten gold, women in beaded gowns twirling to a jazz band's syncopated beat, and men in tails discussing post-war trade. Jane, in a plain gray dress, carried a notebook, her eyes scanning for Muller. He stood by a marble pillar, charming a diplomat with tales of Bordeaux vineyards. Evelyn whispered, "That's him. Watch his hands, always fidgeting when he lies." Jane nodded, slipping through the crowd to eavesdrop. Muller spoke of a shipment arriving at Tilbury docks. Wine, he claimed, but his glance at a man in a navy suit suggested more. "The consignment secure," he murmured. "Our friends across the channel will be pleased." The navy-suited man, introduced as Mr. Lawrence, had a clipped accent and a gold watch chain that gleamed too brightly. Jane memorized his face. High cheekbones, eyes like polished slate. She trailed him to the hotel's cloakroom, where he slipped a note into a coat pocket. Pretending to adjust her shawl, she retrieved it. Coordinates for a dockside warehouse, dated for the next night. The warehouse was her next target. Under cover of dusk, London's skyline smudged with coal smoke, Jane and Evelyn navigated the East End's cobbled alleys, the Thames a dark ribbon reflecting gaslights. The warehouse loomed, its iron doors rested but guarded by a burly watchman. Jane, ever resourceful, distracted him with a spilled basket of apples, feigning a stumble. "Oh, sir, my shopping. Could you help?" As he stooped, Evelyn slipped inside, returning with a crate's label, "Antiquities, Berlin origin." Inside, Jane found forged passports, coded ledgers, and a photograph. Thomas, bound and blindfolded, moments before his death. A note in Muller's hand read, "Ridley knew too much, mistaken for the Raven." Horror gripped her. Thomas wasn't the traitor, he'd been framed to protect Muller. The real mole was Lawrence, the man at the gala, feeding secrets to German revanchists plotting to destabilize the peace. Jane's vow wavered. Grief urged retreat, but justice demanded action. Their trap required precision. Jane forged a letter in Lawrence's style, inviting Muller to a clandestine meeting at a derelict music hall in Shoreditch, promising a new buyer for sensitive documents. Evelyn leaked a tip to Scotland Yard, framing it as a smuggling bust to avoid exposing their espionage angle. The music hall, its velvet curtains moth-eaten and stage littered with broken props, smelled of mildew and forgotten applause. Jane, disguised as a charwoman sweeping the aisles, watched Muller arrive, lantern casting shadows like specters. Lawrence appeared, briefcase in hand. "You've the codes?" Muller hissed. "Better. British naval plans, but the price is double." Jane signaled Evelyn, hidden in the balcony, who dropped a prop, a wooden sword, clattering to draw attention. Police swarmed, their whistles shrill. Muller drew a knife, lunging at Jane, but she sidestepped, tripping him with her broom. Lawrence bolted, but constables nabbed him in the alley, his briefcase spilling papers that sealed their guilt. The aftermath was quiet but profound. Muller and Lawrence faced charges of espionage, their network dismantled. Jane testified in a closed hearing, her voice steady as she recounted Thomas's sacrifice.
His name was cleared, posthumously honored in a secret memorandum. She visited his grave in Highgate Cemetery, where ivy curled like loving arms and left a sprig of rosemary. Remembrance. "You were my lark," she whispered, her vow of solitude sealed a shield against further pain. A journal entry arrived weeks later, slipped under her door. "The raven's wings are clipped, but shadows linger." Its script matched Thomas's, a final puzzle hinting at deeper secrets. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple closed the journal, her heart at peace with Thomas's memory honored, a silent triumph that wove closure into her solitude, though new threads whispered of adventures yet to come.
Chapter 7. The Silent Vow. Expanded. In the tranquil haven of Primrose Cottage, where the rain's soft patter harmonized with the mantel clock's steady tick, Miss Marple sat by the hearth, the letter from O'Connell a fragile bridge to her past. Its warning of unseen allies stirred a deeper ache, one tied to a vow made in the shadow of loss. The locket from her code-breaking days, its microfilm now dust, held Thomas Ridley's final words, "The raven flies at dusk. Trust none but the lark." At 70-something, her fingers lingered on the locket, her mind slipping to 1920 London, where at 32 she navigated a city reborn yet wounded. Thomas, her love from Ashwood Grange, had died in a Dover raid, mistaken for a traitor. Driven by grief and a quest for truth, Jane unraveled a conspiracy of double agents and stolen identities, honoring his memory with a quiet victory that sealed her solitary path. The memory began in Bloomsbury, spring 1920, as London pulsed with post-war vigor. Trams rattling, street musicians playing ragtime, women in bobbed hair and cloche hats striding with new freedom. Jane's boarding house, a narrow building with creaking stairs, smelled of boiled cabbage and wax polish. By day, she typed legal briefs, her wartime role as a codebreaker buried in classified files. Thomas's death haunted her, his gentle smile, his habit of humming Bach while decoding Enigma. Their love, kindled in stolen moments amid air raid sirens, ended with a telegram. Thomas Ridley, shot, suspected espionage, July 1919. Whispers from old contacts hinted at foul play. At a Bloomsbury cafe, over steaming cups of Bovril, Evelyn Carter, now a reporter for the Times, shared rumors. Thomas was on to something big, a mole leaking to German holdouts. The Dover raid wasn't a mistake, it was a cover. Jane's knitting paused, her needles glinting in the gaslight. Who was the mole? Friedrich Mueller, alias the Raven. Runs a wine shop in Whitechapel, but it's a front. He's untouchable, has friends in high places. Jane's quest began at the Imperial War Museum, its halls echoing with the clink of metals and the rustle of documents. Posing as a scholar, she pored over files, finding Mueller's name linked to Dover. His alias matched Thomas's note, a spark igniting her resolve. She ventured to Whitechapel, where the air reeked of tanneries and ale. Disguised in a patched shawl, she entered Mueller's shop, its shelves lined with dusty bottles. "A claret for a wake," she said, watching his scar twitch. "War's taken many," he replied, eyes narrowing. "Who's this for?" "A codebreaker, Dover, 19. His hand trembled, betraying him. Jane spotted a ledger, its pages marked with symbols resembling wartime ciphers. She needed it. Evelyn suggested the Savoy Dalla, a glittering affair for war relief. Jane, as Evelyn's assistant in a drab frock, navigated a ballroom where champagne fizzed and saxophones wailed. Mueller schmoozed with a diplomat, but Jane's eyes locked on Lawrence, a sleek man in navy, his watch chain glinting like a signal. Eavesdropping behind a fern, Jane heard, "Tilbury shipments ready. codes for Berlin. She followed Lawrence to the cloakroom, retrieving his dropped note, warehouse coordinates. The Tilbury warehouse was a fortress of crates, the Thames a black mirror under moonlight. Jane and Evelyn, cloaked in darkness, distracted a guard with a staged argument over a lost purse. Inside, they found forged passports, ledgers, and Thomas's photo, bound, betrayed. Mueller's note confirmed. Ridley, mistaken for Raven, eliminated. Jane's heart shattered, but her vow held firm. She forged a letter, luring Mueller to a Shoreditch music hall, its stage a graveyard of props. Evelyn tipped Scotland Yard, framing it as a smuggling bust. In the hall's gloom, Jane swept the floor, watching Mueller and Lawrence barter secrets. A dropped prop triggered the raid. Constables swarmed. Mueller's knife flashed, but Jane's broom felled him. Lawrence was caught, his papers damning. Mueller and Lawrence faced trial, their network crushed. Jane's testimony cleared Thomas's name. At his grave, she left Rosemary, her vow of solitude a shield. A journal entry, in Thomas's hand, arrived. Shadows linger. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple closed the chapter. Her heart healed, a triumph whispering of mysteries yet to unfold.
Chapter 8. The Final Unveiling. In the tranquil embrace of Primrose Cottage, where the hearth's embers cast a warm glow and the scent of chamomile tea lingered in the air, Miss Marple sat with the journal entry from her lost love, Thomas Ridley, its cryptic warning, "Shadows linger," a final thread in the tapestry of her hidden past. The rain had ceased, leaving the windows streaked with silver, reflecting her 70-something years of quiet resolve. Her fingers, tracing the journal's worn leather, stirred a memory from 1925, when she was 37, a woman seasoned by secrets yet unbowed by loss. The journal hinted at her most audacious exploit, infiltrating a criminal syndicate in Paris to recover a priceless artifact tied to her family's legacy. Disguised as an eccentric aunt, Jane outwitted a cunning adversary, weaving a tale of jazz-soaked nights and perilous gambits that closed her adventurous youth with a triumphant flourish, sealing her past as she embraced her quiet life in St. Mary Mead. The memory unfolded like a Parisian sunset, vibrant yet fleeting. It began in London, spring 1925, where the city pulsed with post-war exuberance. Flappers in beaded dresses danced the Charleston, and motor cars honked through Piccadilly. Jane, now a private typist for a solicitor, lived in her Bloomsbury flat, its shelves heavy with detective novels and mementos of her wartime days. A letter arrived, not by post, but slipped under her door at dawn, its wax seal bearing a familiar fox and thorns crest from her youth. Inside, a note in elegant French script. "The Marple Rose, stolen long ago, surfaces in Paris. Redeem it at the Bal des Ombres, or it vanishes forever. Come alone." No signature, but the crest tied it to Sir Reginald Thorne, the thief from her first adventure, now rumored to lead a syndicate trafficking stolen art. The Marple Rose was no mere trinket, a ruby pendant, centuries old, passed through her mother's line, lost during a burglary when Jane was a child. Its recovery was personal, a chance to reclaim her family's honor. She booked passage to Paris, packing a suitcase with modest dresses and a few disguises, a lace shawl, a wig of silver curls, to pose as Aunt Beatrice, a wealthy widow with a penchant for antiques. The train from Victoria to Dover rattled through fields of budding poppies, the Channel crossing smooth under a sky of bruised clouds. Paris greeted her with a cacophony of bicycle bells and vendors shouting, "Croissant chaud!" The air smelled of fresh baguettes and the Seine's muddy breath.
Jane checked into a modest pension in Montmartre, its walls adorned with faded prints of can-can dancers. The Bal des Ombres, a notorious masked ball held in a decaying mansion on the Ile de la Cité, was her destination. Whispers in expatriate cafes painted it as a haven for black market deals, where Europe's elite mingled with its underbelly. To blend in, Jane needed allies. She sought out Margot Dubois, a former Ashwood colleague, now running a bookshop near the Sorbonne, its shelves fragrant with old leather and ink. Over café au lait at a zinc-topped counter, Margot's eyes widened. The syndicate? They're vipers, art thieves, forgers, worse! Their leader, Le Renard, is untouchable. Jane sipped her coffee, her knitting needles clicking in her lap. Le Renard? Thorn, perhaps? Margot nodded. He's slippery, Jane. The rose will be bait to draw you out. Tread lightly. Armed with Margot's contacts, Jane crafted her persona. Aunt Beatrice wore spectacles and a voluminous gown of lavender silk, her silver wig bobbing with ostrich feathers. At the ball, the mansion's halls glowed with candlelight, chandeliers dripping wax like tears. Guests in masks, peacocks, devils, gilded skulls swirled to a jazz quartet's sultry notes, the saxophone's wail curling through the air like smoke. Jane, her face half hidden by a lace mask, circulated with a glass of champagne, her ears attuned to whispers. She spotted Le Renard, Thorn, by his fox crest cufflinks, his silver hair slicked back, charming a Russian countess near a marble fountain. "Madame," he purred, bowing as Jane approached, "your elegance lights this shadowed night." "Aunt Beatrice," she replied, her voice quavering with feigned age, "I hear you deal in rare treasures, a ruby pendant, perhaps?" His eyes glinted, predatory. "Join me in the salon, dear lady. We'll discuss possibilities." The salon was a mirrored room heavy with velvet drapes. It was a den of deals. Thorn produced the Marple rose, its ruby catching the light like a drop of blood. "A family heirloom, I'm told. Yours for a price, say 10,000 francs?" Jane's heart thudded, but she played coy. "Let me examine it." Her fingers brushed the pendant, confirming its authenticity, the rose-shaped setting, a tiny scratch from her childhood memory. "Exquisite! But I've heard tales of your unconventional acquisitions." Thorn laughed, a low rumble. "The art world is a jungle, madame. Only the cunning survive." Suspicion confirmed. Jane needed proof of his syndicate's crimes. She'd overheard a footman mention a ledger in the mansion's cellar detailing black market sales. Slipping away during a lively foxtrot, she navigated a spiral staircase to the cellar, its air damp and sour with wine casks. A locked door yielded to her hairpin, revealing a cluttered office, ledgers, forged provenances, and a map marking smuggling routes across the Alps. The ledger listed the Marple rose, stolen in 1895, fenced through Amsterdam, now bait for Beatrice. Footsteps echoed. Jane hid behind a cask, her breath shallow, as Thorn's deputy, a wiry man named Claude with a pencil mustache, entered. With a thug, Le Renard worried about the old biddy. "She asks too many questions," he hissed. "Then she joins the others in the Seine," the thug growled. Jane's pulse raced. She pocketed a page from the ledger, slipping out as they turned away. Back at the ball, she signaled Margot, disguised as a cigarette girl, who passed a note to a gendarme contact, posing as a waiter. But Thorn was no fool. As Jane rejoined the dance, he cornered her near a balcony overlooking the Seine, its waters glinting like a blade under moonlight. "You're no widow, are you?" he whispered, his grip tight on her arm. "Who sent you?" "A ghost from your past," Jane replied, twisting free. She threw a champagne flute to the floor, its crash drawing eyes, giving her a moment to flee through the crowd. The chase began. Thorne's men pursued her through Paris's alleys, cobblestones slick with rain, gaslights casting long shadows. Jane darted into a jazz club, its basement throbbing with a trumpet's wail and the clink of absinthe glasses. She hid among dancers, her wig askew, until Margot pulled her into a back room. "Gendarmes are raiding the mansion," she whispered. "Your note worked." The raid was swift. Gendarmes stormed the ball, arresting Thorne and his lieutenants. The ledger's page, handed to the authorities, exposed a network spanning Paris to Istanbul. The Marple rose was recovered, returned to Jane with official thanks. She held it under a cafe's lamplight, its ruby warm in her palm, a piece of her mother's legacy restored. Back in London, Jane stored the pendant in a locked box, her Parisian exploit a secret shared only with Margot. She settled into her quiet life, the syndicate's fall, a final act of her adventurous youth. A last note arrived, tucked in a bouquet of roses. The fox sleeps, but shadows dance. Unsigned, it hinted at a last untold tale, now forever closed. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sealed the journal, her past locked away in a hidden chest. The Marple rose gleamed in memory, her heart at peace as she embraced her role as the village sleuth, where secrets rested and life bloomed in quiet triumph.
Chapter 8. The Final Unveiling. Expanded. In the serene haven of Primrose Cottage, where the hearth's glow painted the walls with warmth and the chamomile tea's aroma soothed the night, Miss Marple sat with Thomas Ridley's journal entry, its warning, "Shadows linger," a final key to her hidden past. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows streaked like tears, mirroring her 70-something years of quiet strength. Her fingers brushed the journal's leather, stirring 1925, when at 37 she embarked on her boldest adventure, infiltrating a Parisian syndicate to reclaim the Marple Rose, a ruby pendant stolen from her family. As Aunt Beatrice, she navigated jazz-soaked nights and deadly gambits, outwitting a foe from her youth to close her adventurous chapter with a triumphant flourish. The memory began in London, April 1925, where the city thrummed with post-war verve, cinemas flickering with silent films, newsboys shouting of labor strikes, women in drop-waist dresses sipping cocktails in Soho bars. Jane's Bloomsbury flat, its shelves sagging with Agatha Christie novels, was her sanctuary. A letter slid under her door at dawn, its fox and thorn seal a ghost from her first case. The Marple Rose surfaces in Paris. Seek it at the Bal des Ombres, or lose it forever. The sender was Sir Reginald Thorne, now Le Renard, a syndicate kingpin. The Marple Rose, her mother's heirloom, stolen in 1895, was a ruby carved into a rose, its gold setting etched with vines. Jane booked a ticket to Paris, crafting her disguise, Aunt Beatrice, a widow with a penchant for antiques, complete with a silver wig and lavender gown. The Dover-Calais ferry swayed under a stormy sky, the air sharp with salt and anticipation. Paris welcomed her with Montmartre's chaos, artists sketching in Place du Tertre, accordions wailing, the scent of roasting chestnuts mingling with perfume. Her pension, a creaky building near Sacré-Cœur, overlooked rooftops glowing in twilight. The Bal des Ombres loomed, a masked ball in a crumbling mansion on the Ile de la Cité, known for illicit deals. Jane enlisted Margot Dubois, her Ashwood ally, now a bookshop owner. Over croissants at Café de Flore, Margot warned, "Le Renard Syndicate is a hydra. Art theft,
Smuggling, blackmail. The rose is bait to trap you. Then I'll be the hunter, she said, her knitting a steady rhythm. She prepared meticulously, studying Parisian underworld gossip in Le Figaro's back pages. At the ball, the mansion's halls shimmered with candlelight, guests in fantastical masks, owls, jesters, dancing to a jazz band's fevered tempo. Jane, as Beatrice, glided through, her lace mask concealing her sharp eyes. Thorne, his fox-crest cufflinks unmistakable, held court near a fountain sculpted with cherubs. "Madame Beatrice," he greeted, his voice smooth as velvet. "A collector, I presume?" "Of rare beauties. A ruby pendant, perhaps?" In the salon, the mirrors reflected their game. Thorne revealed the rose, its ruby a fiery heart. "Yours for a price," he said, eyeing her. Jane touched it, confirming its authenticity. "A bold acquisition, stolen, I wager." His smile tightened. "The past is irrelevant, madame." Jane needed his ledger, rumored to be in the cellar. During a raucous Charleston, she descended, picking the lock with a pin-hair. The cellar's dank air clung to her skin, casks looming like sentinels. The ledger detailed the rose's theft and syndicate deals, smuggled art to Vienna, fakes to London. She tore a page, but voices neared, Claude, Thorne's deputy, and a thug. "The old hag's trouble," Claude snarled. "Dispose of her." Jane hid, escaping as they turned. Back at the ball, Thorne's grip on her arm was iron. "You're no aunt," he hissed. She broke free, shattering a flute to create chaos, fleeing into Paris's labyrinthine streets. The chase was relentless. Thorne's men pursued through Montparnasse, past cafes alive with laughter. Jane ducked into La Coupole, blending with revelers, her wig slipping. Margot, trailing her, whispered, "Gendarmes are moving. Stay sharp." The raid hit as Jane reached the pension. Gendarmes stormed the mansion. The ledger's page sealed Thorne's fate. The rose was returned, its ruby gleaming in Jane's hand. She left Paris, the pendant locked away, her exploit a secret. A final note, "Shadows Dance," arrived unsigned, closing her past. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sealed her chest, her youth's adventures complete, her life now a quiet symphony of village mysteries, resolved with a heart at peace.